Yeah, sanctions are a tool, like a pen. A pen can write something brilliant. It can write something stupid. It can write something confusing. But it's what you do with the pen that's what's going to matter. And I think that that's pretty much the same thing it is with sanctions. So sanctions can be a very effective tool. They can also be completely pointless and even counterproductive. And I think by any measure, any objective measure, we have been in the counterproductive sphere for quite some time. Because the main power that sanctions can have is, frankly, in their removal. If I place sanctions on you and they are biting and they're painful, but I offer you the genuine and legitimate opportunity to withdraw those sanctions if whatever the agreed upon or the desired outcome is, and you do that, and then I remove those sanctions, I now set a standard that says, hey, this is what we think this needs to happen. This is for our security or for whatever the purpose is, but we'll follow through and we'll do what we say we're going to do, and we'll demonstrate that. And as long as you abide by these agreements that we both agree to, these conditions, then the sanctions will be relieved and we'll move on. And I believe that if our objective was the normalization of relations, and if we wanted to say, let's engage and just take the emotion out of it, take the personalities out of it, let's just get into, some legitimate adult type diplomacy, then there's no doubt in my mind that an agreement can be had here, and peace is absolutely possible on the Korean Peninsula. Now, I specified peace as opposed to denuclearization because I agree that in the current environment, the current situations as it exists right now, as they have for decades, there's no chance that Kim is going to denuclearize. And if anyone thinks that he's going to denuclearize before getting any sanctions relief and any kind of relief at all, I mean, it's worse than a fantasy. It's irrational. It's illogical. And yet, there are many in this town that pushed exactly that desire. Somehow we think that because we have a military that's a lot more powerful, that we can basically dictate terms and that we'll put pain on them until they do everything we want. But the problem is the sanctions almost never come off. We've added sanctions. We've done this certainly not just in North Korea, but across the board in many nations. And they almost never come off, whether the other side does what we want them to or not. And then, of course, we say, well, they cheated, and so we'll put them back on or whatever. And the net result is nothing ever gets resolved. Nothing ever moves forward. Now, the primary objective of the United States Department of Defense is the defense and security of the United States and our citizens. And I can assure you that our military, our global power, our ability to project power is unmatched, unrivaled on the planet right now, anywhere. We can reach out and defend ourselves if anyone ever launches an unprovoked attack with our existing force structure, without any additional deployments, with our certainly with our nuclear deterrent and our ability to move conventional power. They're unrivaled, and everybody knows that. We don't need to send signals. We don't need to send a message. They got it. They already understand that. Everybody on the planet understands, believe me, that we'll use force if we think that our interests are threatened. I mean, we do it all the time. So we don't need any new messages there. What we do need, though, is a recognition of just what is reality. If we have successfully deterred Stalin at his worst in the Soviet Union with nuclear power, and that was, you talk about a bloody murderer. I mean, Kim is nothing. He's a neophyte compared to that. Or Mao Zedong, when he had nuclear weapons, and any of the other Chinese leaders after that. They were murderous people, many of them. They had nuclear weapons, and yet they were successfully deterred because what underscores all of them is that they want to live. They want their regime to continue to thrive, and they want to operate within the confines of the country. And so you see now we have, compared to what it used to be, fairly good relations even with Russia and with China. With our former, direct war partner, Vietnam, we're now improving relations there. And yet those governments haven't changed. They're still relatively what they were before. Just their existence is not a threat to the United States. The military power that Kim Jong-un has is just a fraction of what we have and can be deterred easily, and he knows that. His nuclear deterrent is for self-defense and self-preservation, so that he wants to communicate that if we ever try to do something to him like happened with Gaddafi and Saddam and some of these others, that he wants to communicate that I have the ability that they didn't to take out millions of people, whether it's actually on our soil or in the region, whatever. He wants to make sure that that's the case to prevent that very outcome. But that's the intent. It's not to have this offensive capability that one day I'll just launch a missile, because that would be suicidal. And if there's anything you can say about Kim, he is brutal. He is murderous. I mean, as General just talked here about what he did with Kim, his brother there in
Jang Sung-taek.
That's what I'm trying to say.
No, Kim Jong-nam.
Kim Jong-nam, right? Clearly, his morality is just he doesn't care about this kind of stuff. But he does want to live, and he does want to continue to have power and maintain it, and he doesn't want to commit suicide. Because if anything, you can see that he's wanting to expand his economy. He's wanting to improve the quality of life for his country. All those things can work to our advantage, because we see that this is not an irrational actor at all. He's very calculated, but he also understands the dynamic of power. And he understands that he's way on the bottom and that we're way on the top. And if he goes too far, he knows that we can eliminate his regime and kill him. And he's not going to do that. Now, armed with that, we can say, all right, let's start working more cooperatively with our South Korean allies. And I was in Hanoi last February when there was a deal on the table. And I had met with some South Korean officials. I'd met with some other Americans who had some understanding of the negotiations, and there was a deal on the table. As a matter of fact, the papers were in the process of being finalized and had already been written, basically, for what the agreement was. The South Korean side, the people who talked to me, said they were a little disappointed that it wasn't a bigger deal, but a small deal is fine, because within weeks, they told me they were already ready to launch into the next Kim-Moon summit to continue the process and continue the momentum toward that, because they wanted to improve inter-Korean relations, deepen economic ties, make more friendly stuff, with the relocation of family members that have been separated. All of those things were positive and would have continued the process going forward. North Korea wants a step-by-step operation. South Korea is happy and still to this day advocates it's a parallel step-by-step movement. That makes sense, and that's in our interest. Anything that we do that moves towards peace, that moves away from confrontation, that moves away from them shooting missiles and testing nuclear weapons potentially, is a win for us. And we don't have to trust Kim. We don't have to trust our security to anything he may say or any promises, because our military deterrent, nuclear and conventional, is that guarantee. We guarantee our security like that. We don't need to use force. We don't need to threaten the military option. What we need to do is just recognize, as apparently was in the first panel here, they are a nuclear power. They are. Not that they might be or that we can try to prevent them. That's one of the biggest holes in the logic of John Bolton's comments here of recent weeks, because you can't stop them from what they already have. So all you can do is potentially start a conflict and a war in which potentially hundreds of thousands or millions, if it went nuclear, would die for no reason, no purpose, and definitely not something that's necessary. Peace, the opportunity for peace is on the table. If we are willing to recognize that reality, to recognize that our security is not threatened by this, and move towards really working much more closely, I think, with our South Korean allies, because they have a better understanding of this than anyone, obviously. And if we can work in parallel with that and say, hey, one of the things that we have to be willing to do to make all this happen, though, let me clarify that. We have to recognize that we don't get to just issue dictates and just say, here are the terms, sign here. Any negotiation of any side, whether it's something you're negotiating with your company or sometimes with your kids, as I've sometimes done, it's all right, I'll do this and then you do that. And in the negotiation, each side has to be able to come out with something that it wants in order to have an agreement that all can live with. If for me to get what I want, you've got to be able to get a little bit of what you want. And that's what we haven't been willing to do on really a broad number of things across our foreign policy. We just want it to be all our way, and Iran is a great example. We just want them to do what we tell them to do, and we don't give them the opportunity to even possibly have a success, or else it's total weakness and and capitulation and all kinds of other silly stuff that prevents a peaceful outcome. If we can get to the point to where we're willing to say, North Korea, whether I like their governance style or not, whether I like their leader or not, they are a valid, independent nation, and they have their own needs as they see it. And if we can allow them to have something that they want that doesn't threaten us, and that we can get them to give something concrete that we want, and it won't hurt them, then I think you've got the possibility that over time things can move towards. And maybe we could even get an actual peace, but maybe 5, 10 years, 15 years down the road. As long as we're taking incremental steps towards peace, we lower the tensions every day so that war is not necessary, because it would harm everyone. That is possible in my view.
So I would ask Danny, and especially in the light of what's going on in Iran now, we have Trump breathing now fire and fury at Iran, not North Korea, and actually appearing to back it up and backing himself, at least rhetorically, into a corner that it will be difficult for him to extricate himself from. So, Danny, is it, in fact, pie in the sky to hope that things will change in the U.S. posture towards North Korea? Or does it really depend on, given how mercurial Trump is, if you had a Democratic president, maybe Trump has broken enough ice that you could crack a deal? Or if Trump is reelected in a second term, does he perform another U-turn and figure that, he wants to keep the pressure on Iran, so he needs to cut a deal with North Korea?
Yeah.
What's your take?
What I described was what is possible, given the pieces that exist and the history that exists and the capabilities on all sides that exist. This is what is possible. What I didn't even talk about was whether it's probable, given the current political leader here in the United States. He would have to go through a major change. And I am very closely aligned with what you're saying in terms of Trump's, it's my way or the highway, or it's my way or the missiles, as he's been doing lately with the fire and fury. If Trump comes to the position to where, and he has, if anybody's able to do a pivot or a U-turn even, and not think twice, it's Trump, because he's done it on some other issues, domestically especially, and it's conceivable he could do that. If he comes to the calculation in his own mind that this is something that can end up with a political win for me, or it can help me electorally, then I can see where he could make that statement. I mean, my goodness, look how fast he went from fire and fury to, hey, he's my best friend and I love him, with Kim. So he's done it before. And so it's at least theoretically possible he could do it again. But it is much more difficult now because he started with fire and fury. And it's a lot easier to start off hard and come back soft rather than to go backwards again. And, of course, what I think Kim Jong-un has to be careful of is that he doesn't do anything that will make Trump look stupid or embarrass him, because now it's going to be much more difficult for Trump to do anything else. One of the reasons why we had this whole switch here in the first place is because of Kim's willingness at the Olympics in 2018 to soften himself a lot and to be a lot more accommodating and making it easy for Trump to make his move in there. I don't know if Kim can do that right now either. So it could be, Kim may calculate that, it's just, we're just going to wait out the next year and see what happens with the election. Maybe a new person can come in from ground zero and we can start off on a new chance or new chapter and move forward. Or he may say, well, maybe he throws another olive leaf out there to see if Trump can, maybe he sends another, beautiful letter, maybe even, or gives him a Voss. Who knows? Maybe something like that could break the ice and to make him say, hey, I'm willing to make a deal. But something has to change from the current dynamic, because I just don't see Trump being the one to initiate a softening of anything, because he is loath to appear weak.
Danny Davis.
Yeah, I think, especially if you're taking the potential, reunify by force, if that's part's off the table, I don't think the other part in the foreseeable future is even possible, because I think the train has already left the station on the fact that South Korea is just too powerful in every aspect you want to talk about, whether it's, modernity, certainly economic and military power too. I think that's undervalued too often. I served on the Korean Peninsula, and I was actually an American advisor to the Second Republic of Korea Army down in the South, and that was back in the 90s, and I can tell you that they're evolving in development since then. They're a quite potent force on their own right, and there's some debate as to whether they even need us there to defend themselves anymore, because their conventional power is substantially higher than that of North Korea, across the board, really, in any category you want to talk about. But I think that what can maybe mitigate against that even having to be concerned about is that is if we can again, kind of reshape the terms of the discussion, the engagement with North Korea, and look more on saying, hey, let's put this back in the primarily in the diplomatic and economic development sphere, because I do think President Trump has been right in his comments about what North Korea could become. And I mean, we've seen that happen with China, we've seen it happen with Vietnam, and certainly with South Korea. I mean, with the help and the engagement from the international community on an economic basis, there's plenty of opportunity there. Now, North Korea is so much further behind than those others. It'll take probably measured in decades, but it's something that can be measured and can be moving forward. And we don't have to have Kim Jong-un, change his government or anything else. I mean, just to be frank, look what the government we deal with on a regular basis in Turkey and in Saudi Arabia. I mean, there's not a whole lot of happy in democracy and people not doing nefarious things that we otherwise don't like on there, and yet we find a way to work with them, especially when it's mutually beneficial kinds of things, but we don't turn them into an enemy because they don't do what we want. And the same thing can be true with North Korea as well. And I think that there's opportunity there that can be had, that can see them develop. And of course, the more you're developing, the far less likely you have any interest in going down the military path.